We've got a seller whose name is Sandra. She lives in Johns Creek. She says, we're selling an investment property in Atlanta, which closes in January. We're planning to do a 1031 exchange. How do we make this happen? Very difficult to answer questions about a 1031 exchange without starting with a brief discussion on what is a 1031 exchange. The numbers 1031 or 1031 are representative of the Internal Revenue Code 1031, which allows for a 1031 exchange. There was a gentleman whose last name was Starker, who I don't know how many years ago decided that he wanted to swap one property that he owned for a property that somebody else owned, and they literally took the titles, and the owner of property A gave their title to property B, the owner of property B gave their title to property A. There was no exchange of money, and he said basically there was no gains on that property because he was exchanging into something else. The IRS said, no, you got to pay your capital gains taxes, you got to pay your taxes due. Well, Mr. Starker decided, I don't like that. So he sued the Internal Revenue Service. Let me say that one more time. He sued the Internal Revenue Service, and he won. And so it opened the door for any U.S. taxpayer to do a 1031 exchange, which is a like-kind exchange, which means I can exchange a piece of income-producing property for an income-producing property. I could exchange a small apartment building for a retail shopping center. Sandra is asking about is just a typical exchange where you sell your property first. That's called the relinquished property. You buy your property next. That's called a replacement property. Sandra, when it comes to the purchase paperwork, the only thing you have to do is add a special stipulation, and your real estate agent could find the special stipulation in the special stipulations package that is provided by the Georgia Association of Realtors. Is fairly clear, and what it says is that the buyer acknowledges that this transaction is going to be part of a 1031 exchange, and the buyer agrees to do whatever paperwork is necessary to facilitate the transaction, provided it doesn't change the nature or any of the terms of the transaction. Then you have to find a 1031 exchange intermediary. So you sell your property, the contract gets assigned to the intermediary. The buyer pays their money directly to the intermediary instead of to you, which means you have never taken the funds from the transaction. Those funds are held in trust by the intermediary. You have 45 days after selling the relinquished property to identify up to 3 properties. There are other ways to do this. I'm giving you the most common way, but to identify up to 3 properties that you intend to use as a replacement property, and then you have a total of 180 days. There are some exceptions. If that 180th day falls on April the 15th, the last tax day of the year, sometimes your deadline can be April the 15th or 180 days, whichever is faster. You purchase the relinquished property, and the intermediary who has your funds takes your funds and buys the exchange or the replacement property, and then transfers the replacement property to you. And the reason for this is you defer any capital gains taxes. So when you do a transaction like this, if you had $100,000 in recapture tax that you would owe for depreciation, and you owed another $50,000 in taxes for capital gains, then you would not owe either of those taxes at the closing, because you would actually just bring those cost basis, if you will, over to your new property. And if you sold that property someday, you would pay the capital gains. In a lot of cases, people will do these 1031 exchanges. When they pass away, they will actually leave the property to the heirs. The nice thing is that when your property is inherited by your heirs, it goes to them at a stepped-up basis. So if your mom and dad bought a property for $100,000, you inherited it today for $1 million, then it would come to you at a stepped-up basis of $1 million, which means you would only start paying taxes on the property if you were able to sell it for over $1 million.